And welcome back, everybody, to the Auburn Undercover podcast here on the Auburn Undercover YouTube channel. Doing it a little bit different again today outside of the Auburn football facility after Hugh Freeze's Monday press conference. Obviously has not been a ton of recruiting news really over the last month or so as Auburn has been on the road, bye week, all that stuff. They do return home this week to play Vanderbilt. Actually going to be a really, really strong visitor list, and we'll touch on that more on Thursday's show, the Thursday Night Live show that we do, so stay tuned for that. As we get more of a grasp of the list, but already know of some good guys coming in. But for today's show, we're going to do something just a little bit different. Thought about having a guest on, but thought we would mix it up a little bit instead. And we would do, I did a story maybe last week or the week before, ranking from 1 to 27 Auburn's guys most likely of the 25 commits to play in year one. And so we're each going to pick a handful of guys and talk about why we think they could make an impact and who they are, obviously. And other thing to keep in mind here, of course, there's different factors that play into this.
Correct.
On my list of 1 to 27, Deuce Knight was towards the bottom just because I don't think Auburn is going to be rolling with him as a true freshman starting quarterback next year. So while Deuce is one of Auburn's top commits, highest ranked guys, he's not going to be one of the guys we point to here instantly. So it creates some variety a little bit, which is fun.
I agree. And some of it too is that I think we probably expect a lot of these guys to play next year. When we look at this season, and we were just talking to Charles Kelly and thinking about all the guys that are playing as true freshmen for this team. And you look at the fourth down stops when Kentucky has the ball down the goal line. Hugh Freeze mentioned it to us on Monday. That's 6 true freshmen in the game at one time or another in that series inside the 2-yard line. And so you think about it going, look, these guys are going to have an opportunity to play next year, and so there's going to be a big group of them that'll have a chance to play.
Yeah, that's the thing. When I was doing my list of 1 to 27, it was like, okay, well, from 15 on, you're almost splitting hairs. Like,
Correct.
Okay, well, this guy should see the field. This guy should see the field. Like, from 15 to 27, you can start to make a case for, this guy might take a red shirt. Like a guy like Cale Ellis who reclassified him. Like, don't think he would probably play in 4 more games in year one. But to your point, 15 on, there's a ton of guys. Especially with how much Auburn has played freshmen, and you just look at the guys that they have, you feel like Auburn has a really, really strong class. So you feel like a lot of them are going to play. Jason, I'll let you pick a guy. We'll each go one guy. We'll go back and forth. You pick a guy.
It really is hard to go, hey, here's my jumping off spot, because I do think there are a bunch of guys that are going to have a chance to play early in this one. So you start thinking about positions, position groups, and guys that can have an impact. And honestly, for me, a guy that has jumped out since we saw him play is Jordan Crawford.
Yep.
I think because you play a lot of defensive linemen too, I think that's another thing you start looking at it going, in positions where you're going to rotate guys, it's harder on the offensive line because you don't play as many of them. Jordan Crawford on the defensive line, for me, physical, powerful, way more athletic than people might give him credit for.
Yeah.
I think that's a guy. You look at what Malik Blockton has done this year, and you look at how many guys they'll be losing some guys off of this older transfer class. Start thinking about potentially, sorry, I got a motorcycle in the background, I'm going to yell. Thinking about making an impact as a freshman. Jordan Crawford is a guy that to me jumps out as, I think, physical, guy that can come in and play pretty early.
And he's not just a nose tackle. He looks like a nose tackle. You expect him to be a nose tackle. He will
can
play there.
Outside.
He can play across the defensive line a little bit and make things interesting, which helps his case. Jordan Crawford was number 2 on my list, and he made a really, really strong case to be number 1. For me, my number 1 was Anquan Fagans when I did the list, just because I think he's the most college-ready player, and I think you can see that with what Caleb Harris is doing, and I think Anquan Fagans, new boy, is probably a little bit more naturally talented than a guy like Caleb Harris is.
Yeah.
But Caleb Harris has already made a huge impact in year one, even when some people didn't think that or didn't know if he would necessarily. We thought he was a guy that could make an impact.
Yeah.
I think Anquan Fagans his ball skills are off the charts. He has a knack for finding football, great football IQ. You look at what they've done back there in the secondary. Kayan Lee, Jay Crawford, Kensley Faustin switching on and off there at cornerback and safety and whatnot. You definitely think Anquan Fagans is a guy who could play in year one.
I agree. I mean, I think, you look at it and the program you play in, as much football background and as football knowledge as he's had, and you start thinking about, okay, this is a guy that has a chance to be one of those guys. So I like that one. And, you think normally it's a little bit easier to play on defense than it is offense early on. I mean, you still got a lot to learn, but you think about, just, hey, energy, effort, those kind of things can get you started defensively a little bit easier than it can offensively. Then you got to figure it out, and obviously, for a guy like Caleb Harris, being in the spring helped him to get, going. So I think you boys are a guy that absolutely can fit the bill, and I'm kind of going to stay there a little bit.
Yeah.
Just because you look at the makeup of a secondary now, and you start going, how many deep, how many guys you play, and you start going 7, 8, 9 guys. If you look at corner, probably a little bit more difficult when you look at these young corners to project a guy jumping in. But I look at Eric Winters, and I'm like, I don't know where. Strong safety, nickel. One of the, I think those two guys jump in with, Caleb Harris, and jump in with Sylvester Smith, and all of a sudden you start going, okay, that's your 5 or 6 guys that you feel like are in a rotation. Eric Winters is just a natural guy, basketball player, put the ball in his hands, he makes plays. He's a little bit bigger guy, and I think that may be a little bit of a separator for him. Is he's got a little bit bigger body, could be a little bit bigger type of player. So I'm going to stay on defense and think Eric Winters is another guy for me.
I agree with that, and I'm not moving for that matter, because I'm going to go with, I think I'm going to go Donovan Starr there at cornerback. They need guys at cornerback. Look, the guys you have are playing great right now. Kayan Lee is playing incredible. Jay Crawford playing incredible. Kensley Lador-Faustin, after being launched from safety down to corner because he needed extra help, he's playing great. Donovan Starr or Blake Woodby are two guys that I think will be in the rotation of some sort next year. I think I'll go with Starr just because I think he has a chance to play outside a little bit more. Blake Woodby, size maybe limits him to playing inside maybe a little bit more. Of course, worth mentioning that Auburn is still going after Neem Offord, the 5-star Ohio State cornerback commit.
Yeah.
If you get him, he would obviously be the top guy that you would project to play early as a corner. And for that matter, other schools are going after Donovan Starr, so you need to hold on to him as well. But I just think you need to infuse a lot of bodies and talent to that secondary, and I think all of the guys that we just mentioned fit the bill there.
Yeah, and I think it's another spot where you can rotate some guys and do some things. And so anytime you start talking about defense, you're going to have more rotations, more of those guys. I'm going to go a little bit off of the mark a little bit this one, because it's not normally a spot where you think a young guy is going to go play. But we've seen Tavares Dice enough.
Yeah.
And you start thinking about the potential of having some change-ups on the offensive line. Braden Joyner stepping in has been really big for this team. And you got DeAndre Carter there. Tavares Dice is a guy could potentially play tackle, might be a guard. I think he's a guy that could push. And we've seen that. Like, this group's willing to play young guys. Getting in January, going through the spring would be a big deal for a guy like that. But we've seen Tavares Dice. He is physically a guy that looks like he's ready to play in the Southeastern Conference. So it's a little bit off the reservation some, because it's not normally a spot where you go.
But you need tackles, and you feel like Tavares Dice could be a right tackle.
Absolutely. So you do that, and does Too Tall maybe get a look at the left side if you feel like Dice is a guy that can play right tackle. I think from a talent standpoint and a physicality standpoint, he's closer than most true freshman offensive line are going to be.
I agree completely. I'll do one more, and then we can each do one more if that works.
That's fine, yeah.
I want to go with like an Antonio Coleman or a Nate Marshall or something like that. Probably going to go Jared Smith, simply because my lasting memory of him that will be ingrained in my mind now is that Grayson game where he was dominant up front up against Nick Brooks, who is a very talented offensive tackle and huge, who's going to Texas. And I thought Jared Smith looked incredible. He gives you a very different skill set to that Buck room. You think about what it'll be like next year. Kieron Crawford should be back. Jamonte Waller should be back. Joe Phillips should be back. Phillips, kind of an interesting one who can bounce around a little bit. What Jared Smith is exactly, whether he's a buck, defensive end, playing both those positions a little bit up in the air, but I think the progress that he's continued to make, he's probably a little too talented to keep off the field.
Yeah, no, I agree. And again, it's a different. You don't have a guy like that. You got some guys that are maybe Kieran Crawford's closer to that, but you don't. Most of your guys are kind of a little bit more of the stocky linebacker type looks. Jared Smith is a absolute big, long edge guy. You just don't have guys like that on this roster. So I think that's a good call. I think he's a guy that fits right there. You mentioned defensive line. I think all those guys can play. I mean, we've seen them at different times. I mean, just right here, we saw Malik Autry be a dominant performer, and I think he's a guy that has more upside than probably any of the group. Being 6'5" makes it a little tougher. I think because, it's You look at the fundamentals and techniques required. I think some of those things might take a little bit longer. Antonio Coleman's probably the other guy that's the most ready now when you look inside. But I don't know. I may go back and you look at all these freshman guys at wide receiver. Derek Smith is a talented guy, and it's going to be a little bit for me like Malcolm Simmons a little bit.
It is
where you go find a role.
Yep.
And ease into whatever you're looking at. I think he could be a similar type guy, freak athlete, and you start to go, all right, these guys settle in. Now, okay, figure out how we can get the ball in your hands. I think that's a guy that has the potential to do that.
He is very much, when I think of Derek Smith, very similar to Malcolm Simmons, playing all around the field in high school football. Don't know exactly what he is. Other schools recruiting him as safety, Auburn recruiting him as receiver. He is the guy that, as Hugh Freeze said earlier in the year, you have a little corner in the play sheet that just says Derek, and you have a couple plays to get him the ball and make some guys miss and make some plays. My pick, a lot of good options here. I got to go with Alvin Henderson though.
That was my
because
other
you're
one.
losing.
That was my other one.
You're losing Jarquez Hunter there at running back. Obviously, the SEC's leading rusher at this point, and Damari Alston projects to be back in terms of eligibility. Same with Jeremiah Cobb, but then Alvin would be your third guy, and you might end up with him as your only high school back.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, you're obviously going to go to the portal, and a portal guy would probably project over what Alvin is coming in as a freshman. But Alvin is a guy who, look, you use all your backs. You might not. You're obviously not going to be using the third guy, the Jeremiah Cobb, right now as much as you're using Jarquez Hunter, but you are using Alvin Henderson.
Yeah.
When he gets in, you're using that third guy. So he's my last pick again. This is just us picking a handful of guys. You can make the case, like you said, for Malik Autry, for Antonio Coleman, for J.J. Falk, for Elijah Melendez, for...
When you get good classes, that's what you get. You get the ability to see guys that come in and have a chance to make an impact and to do those types of things. That's what you're recruiting. That's how you get to this level. And you get to the next level is by going, hey, have a class of more than 3 or 4 guys that have a chance to make an impact. You want it to be a really difficult decision. And hey, for a lot of years, we were like, okay, here's 4 or 5 guys that might have a chance. Now you look at it and you go, here's 18 to 20 guys that might have a chance.
Yeah, it's like, how do we pick just 5?
And that's it. I think that's the nature of it. When you recruit at a high level, you get a bunch of guys that say, okay, I'm going to come in and have a chance to compete. That's what this class gives you.
Yes, exactly. And like I said, class might not be done. A guy like Neem Offord is a guy that we think can play right away for sure if they get him. Other pieces as well. Jason, I think we'll wrap it up here for Tuesday's show. As we're recording this on Monday, I almost tripped up on that there.
Yeah.
But stay tuned for Thursday Night Live. Probably not going to be live from AU Club, but we will have the show live at the same 6 o'clock Halloween night.
Yeah, I gotta take care of the trick-or-treaters on Thursday night.
Yep, trick-or-treaters. I have a big weekend with friends coming into town, so I'm headed to the Atlanta airport, which will be thrilling as always. But we will have a show for y'all on Thursday, of course. Talk about recruiting probably to end the show, talk about what will be a huge visitor weekend. And so we will catch you guys on that one and appreciate you tuning in.